Back in the mid-90s, I had a chance to sit down and talk about religion with Peter Kreeft, a philosophy professor at Boston College. Peter is a highly respected author of numerous books. The one I had read at the time was called Yes or No, Straight Answers to Tough Questions About Christianity. It's written in the form of an informal dialogue between a Christian and a skeptic. Based on the contents of the book, I figured Peter would be an excellent person to talk to, because it's obvious he is someone who is willing to dialogue and won't get bent out of shape by criticism or an opposing viewpoint. The book is written in layman's terms, and I figured that quite possibly Peter might not be particularly sophisticated in religious argumentation, that maybe he works in a sheltered intellectual environment, and that some of my observations will come as a rude awakening to him, and that basically I would record a strong entry from my viewpoint, which is that of a general theist who is at the same time strongly opposed to Christian theism. Well, it turns out that Peter Kreeft is, in my judgment, probably the smartest and most sophisticated of all the people I've talked to. I think this particular book of his was specifically geared towards the layman and can be misleading as to his actual intellectual status, which is considerable. So he was a formidable opponent. It was kind of like going against George Foreman in his prime as heavyweight champion. Nonetheless, I was very pleased because engaging a top mind and hashing out the issues is what it's all about for me. We had 3 sessions. In our first meeting, we talk about his book and what I find wrong with Jesus. Did God create evil?
Some people are not too keen about discussing things like this, particularly if they know that I'm not too likely to...
On both sides, frankly. A lot of Christian bookstores don't like controversial apologetics, intellectual stuff. They prefer stuff that makes people feel good.
Yeah, that's been one of my big conclusions, is that people like to believe what they like to believe.
Well, there's 2 different conceptions of religion involved here. Is religion something like science, or is it something like psychotherapy? Is its purpose to tell you what is, or is its purpose to make you feel better?
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in what is
so
true.
So am I.
Now, I assume you're a Catholic. Okay. Now, where do you put yourself on that range?
Ordinary traditional Catholic.
So, okay.
Politically, I disagree with both the right and the left. Theologically, I'm traditional. Not fundamentalist, but traditional.
Yeah. Page 50 say, how can a good God make evil? He didn't make evil. So I don't know how you can say he didn't make evil if you see diseases and droughts and natural...
Well, there's 2 kinds of evil. There's moral evil, sin, which we make by our free will, and there's physical evil, like diseases, droughts, and so on. Diseases and droughts are not miracles. They're not direct acts of God. They emerge from nature. God does not intervene one way or another. So I think God's policy in creating the world was to set up a realm of natural law where things would work on their own to give the world independence. And some of the things would be good for us, and some of the things would be bad for us. I don't think God could have made any different world. If he made a world with rocks in it, somebody's going to bang their head on the rock.
Yeah. Does that answer the question? But he did create evil, though, didn't he?
He created a world which has an intrinsic structure.
Yeah.
The structure of that world is not like a dream that you can manipulate by your consciousness. It's got hard edges on it. Now, if you're wise and good, you can walk through that world without bumping against its hard edges and not experiencing suffering. But we're not wise and good. We're foolish, partly, and bad, partly.
Yeah.
So we're going to bump into rocks and bash other people's brains out with them.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not thinking about the evil that's caused by man. I'm thinking about the evil that comes directly from God.
Well, that's still a problem, but just suppose there was no evil caused by man. Just suppose every person on earth was a saint.
Yeah.
And loved his neighbor as himself and loved God with his whole heart. You would almost transform the earth into heaven. People would still die, they'd still get cancer.
Well, yeah, right.
But they die as saints with smiles on their face.
People dying of cancer are not going to they're going to be
saints,
suffering.
The saints when they're tortured over a barbecue pit, die with jokes on their lips?
No, they don't.
Yes, they do. St. Lawrence did. His last words to the emperor, who was roasting him on a barbecue spit, was, "Turn me over, I'm not done on the left side yet."
And you were there?
No.
That's a nice story, but I don't know. I have trouble believing that.
Yeah, this is very, very rare. Because most people are egotistic and worried and selfish and materialist and ordinarily what we call human.
Yeah.
But if people were radically different, very, very wise and very, very good and very, very unselfish, then at least 90% of all suffering would be wiped out.
Sure, yeah. But that's what I'm focusing on, the 10%.
Moral evil is easy to get got off the hook for. Physical evil is much harder.
Yeah.
Now, let's leave the animals aside for a minute, because that, in a sense, is the hardest part of the problem of evil to solve. Because the animals don't sin and yet they suffer.
Yeah.
How come? And we don't have much information about that. Let's just talk about...
Right, I don't have an answer for that, yeah.
Let's just talk about a saint falls into the earth and due to an earthquake and gets squeezed. Now, why does that happen? Because the earth works by natural law. What else could God do? A real physical world is going to work not by a moral law, but by a physical law. The earth is going to open up when the forces, the physical forces move it, not when people deserve it. So it's not going to just swallow mafia hitmen, it's going to swallow saints too. So I don't see how God could have made any different kind of a world.
Yeah, given we have this world, it's hard to see a different type of world where you don't fall off.
I can, however, see a different kind of human being, a different kind of attitude, or a different kind of philosophy, or a different kind of consciousness. One in which there is indeed suffering, but it's not resented and hated and feared. And you can see that even in some human beings today. If you go over to India and look at some of these Hindu mystics walking on beds of hot coals and sleeping on nails, and sometimes this happens, you see, it is possible to have a radically different relationship between the mind and the body. The mind can be much more impervious to bodily suffering than it is. So that leads me to think that it may be possible that the old Garden of Eden story, however mythical and symbolic, designates something that really happened. Once upon a time, the mind and the body were differently related. And we didn't experience pain. When Adam stubbed his toe on a stone, he didn't say shit. He said, "How interesting."
Okay.
Possible.
I
don't know. It's possible.
Editorial comment. Notice what Peter did. He kept shifting the discussion towards human moral evil, for which God is not primarily responsible for, and away from what I was trying to focus on, physical evil, for which God is responsible. God did create diseases, droughts, and a cruel animal kingdom. So I still say that his statement on page 50 of his book that God didn't make evil is incorrect, and is a whitewashed assessment of God.
Okay, that makes...
In other words, I believe, I cannot prove, but I believe that God's got a good reason for allowing all the evil that he allows, and that he'll bring good out of it in the end.
Yeah, that's roughly my answer, yeah.
Are the creation days in the Bible literal 24-hour days? The point is that if the Bible's account of creation in only 7 days contradicts science, then the Bible can't be considered a valid communication from God. Peter's contention was that the days are symbolic and represent rather eras of time, and thus the account does square with science.
All right, but yet it talks about the evening and the morning.
Symbolic language again, beginning and ending, just like the word day.
Okay, how about this one? Adam was created on the 6th day, so therefore he lived on the 7th day. If these days were long periods of time, thousands of years, then Adam would have been thousands of years old. But he wasn't. He died at 969 or something.
Well, he was created late on the 6th day. And now we're in the 7th day. Once God stopped creating, you get the beginning of the 7th day, which we're in now. So that whole period of time where living things come to be on Earth, whether by evolution, creation, or both, is the sixth day.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get the last species, man, the sixth day is over. The seventh day begins.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before. All right.
Editorial comment. So a day can be an age because the seventh day or era is still going on now. And Adam did not necessarily live all the way through the sixth day. So he doesn't have to have been older than the 930 years the Bible ascribes to him. And my contention that the creation days have to be literal 24-hour days takes a beating here.
There's a real strong right hand just underneath the heart. And Muhammad Ali is taking some punishment now. About 25 seconds left in the round.
The need for an afterlife.
Page 111. That's why there has to be a next life for justice. When you really love someone, you see that he is irreplaceable, indispensable. If he dies forever, then life is an outrageous horror. It treats people like diapers. It dispenses with the indispensable. It replaces the irreplaceable. So you believe that?
Yep.
Okay, I do too. I thought that was the best part of your book right there. That's what I think, is that life really doesn't make sense unless there is an afterlife.
Yeah.
Pascal's wager.
You agree with that wager? That's a good wager? Yeah. But there's another way of looking at it, that if you die and suddenly you're surprised to be confronted with Mr. Muhammad and Allah, and they're very displeased with you because you believe that Jesus was a deity, and that's blasphemous, and you're going to have to go somewhere.
Well, if Islam is correct, then all Christians are going to have a lot of remedial theology lessons in purgatory if they get to heaven.
Yeah.
And if Christians are correct, then Muslims are going to have remedial theology lessons. So somebody's wrong.
Yeah. So I mean, doesn't that invalidate Pascal's wager? That
No, it just means there's two Pascal's wagers. There's the Christian one and there's the Muslim one.
Uh-huh.
So if you make a Pascal's wager for each of the religions of the world, then you have to make a great big Pascal's wager to say which one makes the biggest difference. Now, let's say the Hindu Pascal's wager. Hinduism might be true, it might be false. Well, maybe take a wager on it. If it's true, then we're all parts of God, and we're all enlightened already, and Tattvam Asi, Atman is Brahman. But if I don't believe this, what do I lose? Well, a couple of reincarnations. Eventually everybody makes it, there's no hell. It doesn't make a very big difference. If I reject Hinduism, what have I lost? A couple of reincarnations, a little bit of time. If I reject Jesus, and he's the only Savior, if I deliberately reject him, I've lost heaven. That's pretty important. If I reject Muhammad, and he's God's final prophet, what have I done? I've really pissed off God. I haven't necessarily lost my salvation. The Quran itself says, don't interfere with Christians and Jews. They have the same God that we do, and many of them will be saved. But God wants them all to accept his supreme prophet, Muhammad. So I've lost something, but not as serious as I've lost if I've rejected Jesus. So the most serious Pascal's wager is still the Christian one.
Unless there's some less or more obscure religions that are more severe.
Well, then you've also got to take probability into account. Suppose I say, by Pascal's wager, I ought to run home right now because maybe my house is on fire. And what I'm doing now is important, but not as important as saving my home. So what am I doing here in my office? Well, there's no probability that my house is on fire. There's no reason to think that. So some obscure sect comes up to me and says, if you don't join our group, which has only 13 members, you will not only go to hell, you'll be transformed into the devil. I say, wow, that's awful, but I'm still not going to join your group because I think you're crazy. There's no evidence that you're right.
Good point. All right.
Ali sits back on the ropes and tells Foreman to come in. Ali doing exactly what he's actually not supposed to do, leaning up against the ropes and taking the punches of the heavy-hitting George Foreman.
Editorial comment. I don't know where Peter gets the idea that the Muslim hell is any less severe than the Christian hell, or that Christians will be saved even though they don't ultimately submit to the Quran. The Quran 7:36 says, quote, Those who reject our communications are the inmates of the fire. 572 says, they do blaspheme who say God is Christ, the Son of Mary. Whoever joins other gods to God, the fire will be his abode. Unquote. Also, as Dan Barker, an atheist, once pointed out to me, Christianity was once itself a minor, obscure sect of, ironically, only 13 people. So making a reliable judgment on which religions are substantial enough to include in your great big Pascal's wager is not at all a sure thing. But all that aside, Peter did wisely point out that making the safest wager is really not the kind of response God wants from us. Jesus and slavery.
From what I read in the Bible, he accepted slavery.
No, he said nothing about slavery. He was not a politician. That wasn't his business.
But
obviously, the spirit of Christ is far from the spirit of slavery. But his business was to join the party and lobby for laws. Jews didn't have slaves, by the way. He was a Jew. So he didn't have to oppose it. Romans had slaves, but he wasn't a Roman.
But he used parables involving slaves.
Sure. Doesn't mean he approves it.
But how
I use parables including wicked stepmothers. Doesn't mean I think that stepmothers ought to be wicked.
But he never said anything against that. I mean, here's a man that presumably has such compassion, and yet he didn't notice that slavery is a bad thing.
He also never said anything against human sacrifice. And many of the pagan nations around the Jews were practicing human sacrifice. And why did he say nothing against human sacrifice? Because already in the Mosaic Law it was forbidden. And also in the Mosaic Law slavery was forbidden. There was servitude, but after 7 years you were freed.
Well, that's not forbidding slavery.
That's not slavery.
Limiting.
No, that's not slavery either. You didn't own the servant's person. It was like the feudal system, that your servant couldn't go away from your property, and there had to be a freely entered into contract as to how much work was to be done and how much to be paid, but he was yours for 7 years. So that was like it wasn't really slavery. It was a kind of unfair system, because if you were in the lower class, you didn't get equal opportunities for the upper class, but it was not slavery.
I don't see how you can say that.
Well, that's a technical argument. Go to the rabbis to have that explained in Leviticus.
But if people are given the permission to buy and sell people and buy their children.
Well, Marx says that's what a capitalist is, somebody who buys and sells people because they buy and sell people's labor.
Yeah, what does Marx have to do with it, though?
Well, Marx is wrong. He's misunderstanding capitalism. So I think similarly, you're wrong. You're misunderstanding Old Testament Judaism, which seems to be slavery, like capitalism seems to Marx to be slavery, but it isn't. There's a significant difference. But you can't expect any one man, even if he's the incarnate God, to do everything in 3 years.
But he, in these parables that he gave, two of them, the approval of slavery is implicit, I think.
I don't think so.
Well, if he ends a parable saying, "And that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will shall be beaten with many stripes," and he's comparing the servant-master relationship with our relationship to God. So
that's a very appropriate comparison. Here, let me shock you. We don't have any rights at all over against God. We are God's slaves. We shouldn't be each other's slaves. Slavery is very wrong on a horizontal level, but it's inevitable on a vertical level. What rights could I have against God if He created me?
Oh, okay. Well, that's that part of it. But what about using the part of slavery as an institution here on earth, using that as an example of the proper state of affairs?
He used other evils too. He used an unjust judge who was selfish and didn't care about anybody. He just explicitly described him as somebody who cared neither for God nor for man. And an old woman came and bothered him time and time again. Give me justice. He said, well, God the Father's like that. Keep bothering Him. Keep praying over and over again, and eventually He'll give you what you want. Don't lose heart. Now, did He mean by that to say God's evil? No. That's an a fortiori argument. If even an unjust human being will finally grant justice, then how much more will the good God grant justice? So he deliberately used an evil example for God. So he may have done the same thing with slavery.
Let me read one other passage to me that Jesus says, and I can't read this and think that he was against slavery. Okay, and again, the parable is in Luke 17:7-10. And which of you, having a servant plowing and tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank the servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. So likewise you, when you have done all these things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants, we have done what it was our duty to do.
Yep. I think it's a very beautiful parable because it's not about slavery at all. It's about our relationship to God.
But isn't it implicit when we use a comparison like that?
I'm much less than a slave in relation to God. If I'm the world's greatest saint, and I've never committed a sin, and I've obeyed every law perfectly, then when I die and meet God face to face, I'm not going to say to him, you got to let me into heaven, look how good I am. I'm going to bow down and worship him and say, you're everything and I'm nothing.
But to use slavery as, I mean, I agree with that part of it, but to use slavery for that, I mean, even in this situation here, if I were a slave, well, first of all, I would question it immediately if I happened to suddenly find myself.
The Greek word is doulos, which can mean servant as well as slave. And I think the Jews would have interpreted it as servants because they had servants but not slaves. But then we're back to our distinction with Jews.
Okay, I want to go back to that later, but I would not make my servant. I would say, well, why don't you take a shower and eat something first, and don't worry about me until a little bit later.
Oh, sure you would.
And then I would say thank you.
Yes.
But Jesus wouldn't? And doesn't that show?
No, I think he's saying, he's telling the parable not from the master's point of view, but from the servant's point of view. He's not saying, this is the kind of master you ought to be. He's rather saying, this is the kind of servant you ought to be.
Jesus never...
I think it's a question of perspective. You can focus on one text like that and say, wait a minute, you're stretching interpretation. The right interpretation is Jesus should have trashed slavery and didn't. He missed an opportunity. And I say, no, that's not so because, and we can keep arguing about texts like that, and that's focusing on little things. The big and obvious point is, of course Jesus is against slavery. How could he not be? His fundamental message is love God with your whole heart and your neighbor as yourself. Your slave is your neighbor. To love him as yourself means putting yourself in his position. Would you want to be a slave to a cruel master? Of course not. Well, then liberate him. Of course he would want slaves liberated.
So he didn't say anything because it was obvious that he was against it?
I don't know why. Frank, to be very honest with you, I don't know why he didn't say anything about it. I think it's simply because he was apolitical. He was not working on a political level. And of course, the abolition of slavery came about largely through Christian forces, Wilberforce in England and the abolitionists here. So the spirit of Christ certainly was the thing that abolished slavery.
Muhammad is allowing foemen to come in on him, inviting him in and counterpunching, inviting him in, talking to him. Angelo Dundee screaming from the corner, Ali, get off those ropes. But Ali continues to talk to foemen.
About same time next week?
Sure.
That would be great. Okay, yeah, because you have some interesting points. Okay, yeah, I got to listen to that tape. Go over, you know, some of the things you said I had some trouble following because I'm trying to maintain my own position. I sort of have to suspend my own position in order to understand yours. And then when I try to understand yours, then I've forgotten my position.
This is going to be a fascinating book, though.
Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, thanks very much for the time, and I will see you next week, same time now. Great.
Great.
All right.
It's not an act of charity on my part. I enjoy doing this.
Okay, good.
Here's our second meeting. Extraordinary Faith and Miracles.
I don't think
read the book of the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament. Peter and John go in the temple. They see the man blind from birth. and they say, Jesus Christ heals you. They don't pray to God for a healing. They say, Jesus Christ heals you, declaring it.
Yeah, so you see, I don't believe that. I believe that's
right.
just a story. I don't think it actually happens.
I've seen miracles myself, literal physical miracles in front of my eyes.
Really? Like,
Yeah.
like what?
Like my own daughter, who had a malignant brain tumor showing up on the X-rays, and the doctor gave her 6 months to live. And Father McDonough, who's a faith healer.
Yeah, I've heard that name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Older guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His sister, who was a nun, was also a faith healer, came in and prayed over her, speaking in tongues, and the surgeon, who was a crackerjack surgeon but an atheist, said, "Get that witch doctor out of here." We said, "Doc, you do your thing, we'll do our thing." And many people prayed. And during the operation, somehow or other, the tumor changed from malignant to benign. And we saw the doctor's report. He said, "This is impossible. I have no explanation of how this could possibly have happened." She's fine. She's 22 and healthy.
Anyway, I maintain that Jesus meant he was overstating by saying you can physically move mountains, or it's almost like saying you can walk on water if you really believe so. And I think that's like an insult to God to say that, because that's not the way God created the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like wanting things the way you want them instead of the way God created them. I think it's important.
That would not be faith, of course. That would be egotism. Faith is a response to what God says and what God wills. Faith is not, I believe I can do this because I have a big head.
No, but say you're in a situation where you think you can walk on water in order to...
But the whole crucial point is, why do I think I can walk on water?
Because Jesus said I could, if I had enough faith. And I have tremendous faith, and there's 5 people about to drown, and I know I can save them, and I'm going to go out. And then what happens? I'm going to drown too. So that's an example of the danger from that kind of overstatement. My opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Let's see. Now I find.
By the way, I agree very strongly with you about most faith healers, because they make people feel guilty when they're not healed because they don't have enough faith.
Yeah. And that's I think that's a very devastating effect. You didn't have enough faith.
That's why I wanted to make that sharp distinction between ordinary faith, which has no guarantees at all, and the very unusual miracle-working faith of the saints who just pronounce cures miraculously.
Because I don't know where that is. These saints with the extraordinary faith. I don't know.
The unequal value of men and women in the Bible.
A religion that doesn't value men and women equally, I have to reject. And from what I read in the Bible, men and women are not regarded as equals.
Where?
Okay, in the New Testament, there's a passage where Paul says that God is over Christ, Christ is over man, and man is over woman. And that's like 4 different levels of people, or beings.
But that's not a level of worth, because God and Christ are equal in worth, and nevertheless the Father has authority over the Son. Therefore, in Christian terms, to be under somebody else's authority is in no way an expression of inferiority.
But if there's a difference in intrinsic worth, then something's wrong.
Yeah, there isn't.
Okay, well, there's a passage in the Old Testament, which I wish I could find right now. Let's see.
Well, let me give you one. The first man-woman passage that's relevant is in the Garden of Eden.
Exactly, go ahead.
Where Eve eats the apple, then gives it to Adam.
Yeah.
Now, what a great opportunity for Adam to blame Eve. So, of course, he takes it and says to God, "The woman you gave me, she's to blame." God doesn't accept that at all. He holds them both equally responsible.
Okay. But
and right before that, when it says God created them in the image of God, as male and female, equally in the image of God.
But in amongst those is he created man and then a helper. A helper, by definition, is not equal. Well, then
there you go. In the world's terms, yes. But Jesus is the supreme helper. Look at that lesson in John 16 where he washes the disciples' feet. His role as the creator is to be the helper.
Okay, how do you get around this one here? A woman in the Old Testament gives birth to a man. She's unclean for a week. She gives birth to a female child. She's unclean for 2 weeks.
I have no idea.
Well, I think it's because they were chauvinists, and they considered men superior to women. And that's part of the Mosaic law, which sort of comes from God, does it not?
Yeah.
So that means your God.
But I don't think it's moral chauvinism. I don't think that ritual law implies anything about moral worth.
What is it
or
imply?
ontological worth.
I mean, there's no biological or any basis for...
I don't know. I don't know what the symbolism is supposed to mean.
To me, it's chauvinism.
As it turned out, Peter was not available the following week, so for our third and final session, we decided to wait until I finished reading his latest book, Handbook of Christian Apologetics, which he co-authored with Father Ron Toselli. The book covers all the important issues, and it was rated among the top 20 books of 1994 by Christianity Today magazine. Though I disagree with most of the Christian propaganda in it, I found some of the insights about God and humanity quite good. And the writing, unlike that of most books dealing with these weighty matters, to be refreshingly creative, succinct, and well-crafted. I prepared fiercely for this session, carefully typing out 19 pages of notes on the issues. The Ali Foreman clips. I did that because, first of all, I thought it was funny. Secondly, I wanted to illuminate the nature of my usual style, which is to let the other person talk, see what he has, how he thinks, what his best punches are. Don't press the issues fully yet, and then in the second half of a meeting, or in the final session of multiple meetings, try to finish strong. That's my usual pattern, and it parallels Ali's strategy in that famous fight. Now, our dialogue was cordial and a long way from shouting and table pounding, but make no mistake about it, beneath the congenial and calm demeanor of both of us is an intense desire to assert the truth of what we believe and to have our ideas win out in a fair exchange. I do not view my discussions as primarily boxing matches, contests between two individuals to see who is the superior debater. This isn't about egos or about me. I want the truth to prevail, even when, especially when, I happen to be holding the wrong view on a particular point. I don't care if I lose, because if the truth becomes more clear, I win because I get a better understanding of the truth. My style may often appear to be congenial and laid back, but that is not my underlying mindset. I am on a burning mission. I get nervous and anxious before every discussion. I passionately want things to go well in favor of what I think the truth is. This is not just an exercise in seeing what other people think. It is a quest for the truth about religion. I thought this upcoming third session, which we did over the phone because the school year was over and Peter no longer had office hours, went reasonably well for me. In terms of the boxing metaphor, I was hoping to score a clean knockout, but ended up, in my subjective opinion, with a win by decision. Of course, some viewers may think I did win by a knockout, or lost by a knockout. Who knows? People see things very differently. Hell as the most objectionable Christian doctrine.
Okay, now hell. Some of the objections that you listed before your answers, because I tend to agree with the objection. The one about hell, where it says the same sort of relationship, hell has the same sort of relationship as 50 years of torture to a 3-year-old's theft of a cookie. And I think that's absolutely true. That's a perfect analogy, or very good analogy.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to answer that objection without knowing God and God's holiness, and in the light of that, the awfulness of sin. I mean, if you just look at sin as a mere human failing, and look at it only on a horizontal level as behavior that somewhat harms other human beings, then it's bad, but it's not anything in the category of something that deserves to be sent to hell. If, on the other hand, you look at sin as pulling the plug to God, and God is the source of all good, then at some point or other, the source of all good is denied, and you're gone.
Yeah, okay, well, yes, I don't have a big problem with annihilation, or as you said it, which I thought was nice, pulling the plug. But torturing, that's the thing.
Oh, I don't take that imagery literally. I think that's put there to scare us into believing that there's something so horrible that we can't conceive that's probably even worse than torture. Not morally worse. God as a torturer would be something of a moral problem, to put it mildly. I don't think you can take the language about hell, the fire, and the torture and whatnot literally.
Editorial comment: but hell is not symbolic. The descriptions of hell are symbolic, but hell itself is, biblically and by church teaching, real. The horrendous imagery of fire describes the nature of this very real place or state called hell. Symbols symbolize something. They are not, quote, just symbols. They point to an underlying reality, but Christians play this very dishonest game of pretending hell is not really hell. Peter himself is aware of this ploy. Pages 295 to 296 of his book, quote, "The usual way out of this argument is to interpret the Bible, or rather parts of it that you do not want to believe, non-literally. The problem with this, besides the obvious dishonesty in foisting your own wants onto the data, is that although the scriptural imagery is not meant literally, the reality of the hell that is thus imaged clearly is." Unquote. So Peter admits that hell is real, not just symbolic. Yet he fails to come to the simple logical conclusion that the Christian God is therefore not loving. I did not find Peter's defense of hell either in his book or in our discussion convincing at all. To me, the Christian God is a torturer, and that is a moral problem, for me, to put it mildly.
But I think you say yourself someplace that even if it's not literal,
It's still very serious, yeah.
or as another minister told me, a minister told me that it's worse. It may not be literal, it's worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's always been the biggest sticking point for me for Christianity, is the idea of hell.
Well, that's a reasonable perspective, I think. I mean, if you're going to reject it on any grounds, that's a pretty good ground to reject it on.
Miracles.
No, well, I wanted to ask you a personal question first, regarding your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you say she had a miraculous healing.
May have been miraculous. Looked like it.
Okay.
I'm not terribly confident that it was.
Okay. Yeah, because the healing services I've been to, a lot of people make all kinds of claims.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned the doctor was an atheist, so to me, if it was a really miraculous healing, then the doctor would have been astounded and converted right there, probably.
Not necessarily.
So it wasn't something like the tumor disappeared in a matter of minutes, or it just went away.
Well, the secondary wasn't a tumor; it was an accumulation of intracranial fluid. Went away overnight. The tumor changed from a malignant tumor, as it showed up in the CAT scan, to a non-malignant tumor in the operation. The surgeon said, "I've never seen anything like this in my life," but he didn't say it's a miracle.
Yeah, that would have been my question. Did he regard it as a miracle?
No.
Oh, okay. Was this a major effect in your religious belief, though?
No.
You had already been a believer before that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right.
What surprised me with regard to my personal belief was how little this terrible threat shook my intellectual belief and how much it shook my emotional reliance. Faith has those two elements in it, the intellectual and the emotional. And I found that my faith was much stronger than I thought it would have been intellectually and much weaker than I thought it would have been emotionally.
Did God make evil?
We argued about your other book, the Yes and No book. You said that how can God make evil? He didn't make evil. And I still say that he did make evil because he created droughts and diseases. So don't you have to admit he made evil? Physical evil.
Mm-hmm. All right. He made a universe that had defects in it, in the universe that caused harm and pain to human beings.
Yeah.
You know.
Mind over matter. Hot coals and sleeping on beds of nails.
Now, you also said that people sometimes walk on hot coals, or some people can do that and lie on beds of nails.
Mm-hmm.
And that this reflects a radically different relationship between mind and body.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that?
Mm-hmm.
So, from what I know, it doesn't. It doesn't reflect that. It just reflects normal physics. Some of the skeptic magazines I read give a good explanation of how people lie on beds of nails, and how they walk on hot coals.
How does it work?
Hot coals, it's like a cake in the oven. The cake itself is a very poor conductor of heat, so you can touch it even though it's quite hot for several seconds. If you touch the metal pan it's in, you'll get burned right away because the metal is a good conductor.
Mm-hmm.
So the hot coals are a very poor conductor of heat, and if you move along fairly quickly, you'll have no problem. And you don't need this radical difference in your mental state or emotional state to do that. And people have just go ahead and just...
I'm not aware of that. That may be so.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, though, why only some people can do it.
No, that's the whole point. Anybody can do it.
But
they have to get them, because it's what do they call it, counterintuitive, because you don't want to do that because you're scared.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out you can do it because the heat doesn't transfer quickly enough.
Well, I haven't checked these accounts, but I have read accounts in which the Hindu holy men do it, and Western skeptics try to do it and get burned.
Oh, so that would be interesting, because the skeptic magazines, I mean, they do it themselves. I mean, I have a video on it too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they may be taking individual cases where somebody didn't walk quickly enough and stood there, got an ember caught between their toes. Yeah, so from what I've read quite a bit about that particular thing, I think that's a neat little item.
That may well be so. That's enlightening.
And then the bed of nails things, I saw a demonstration on video how balloons with different weights on them can, on one nail they can't support any weight, but the more nails you put there, you can support quite a bit of weight before it breaks. So the same thing, if you get enough nails and they're even, it has to be even, uneven and head of the other ones, they'll get hurt.
I see.
And you won't get any of these holy men walking on hot metal. I'll guarantee you that.
No.
So, anyway, that's
That's
part
true. If the soul had such a miraculous power over the body, why wouldn't it work for metal as well as for coals?
Yeah, because it's not miraculous. It's within the realm of physical possibility.
The length of a day in the creation account.
The days of Genesis, you interpret those as not literal days, but ages or periods of thousands of years. But if that's the case, then we have, according to the account, vegetation being created on the third day and the sun on the fourth day. So you have vegetation growing for thousands of years without the sun.
Yeah, we don't have a literally chronological account there. The point is not a scientific description. The point is a poetic explanation of the origins and design of things.
The Bible expecting the imminent end of the world 2,000 years ago.
Revelation uses the word shortly or soon about all these things happening, and that still to me is I don't see how soon, no matter how it's measured, can mean 2,000 years later.
Oh, I do. That's the same principle we've already seen twice in this conversation. That is, interpret a word not in a mathematical and scientific way, but in a normal human and, in a sense, more subjective or at least personal way. Here, let's say a little kid is being told that grandma is coming from California and Grandma's terribly important. Her coming is terribly important. So he says to his mother, when is Grandma coming? And Mommy says, soon. Now, that might be in 2 hours. It might be in 2 months. But soon depends upon expectation. And
yeah, but it doesn't depend on the expectation of the person you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And God was talking to humans. He wasn't talking to himself.
Right.
So like that example you used about Grandma coming, I was thinking of an example of a father driving kids cross country to a Disneyland or something,
mm-hmm.
and half hour out of the driveway, the kids ask, "Are we there yet?" And the father says, "Just about."
Mm-hmm.
And if you're talking to the kids, you've made the wrong answer.
That's because the kids have watches. There's two in Greek. There's 2 words for time, and kairos is always measured not by clocks but by purpose and importance. So if you look at the word soon in kairotic terms, then the 2 supremely important events that ever happened, namely God himself visiting his creation, the first coming and the second coming of Christ, are like 2 enormous mountain peaks. And no matter how long the valley is between them, that length is not as great as the height of those 2 peaks. Therefore, the second coming comes soon after the first coming. The only other things that happen between the first coming and the second coming are minor events like the fall of the Roman Empire and the Holocaust and the decline of Western civilization and so on.
But if you're talking to sophisticated philosophers, that might hold. But Jesus was talking to, or the writers of the Gospels were talking to average people.
Exactly the opposite. Sophisticated philosophers in the 20th century are usually so influenced by science that they measure time chronologically rather than kairotically, whereas children and primitives are much more likely to understand soon in a kairotic instead of a chronological way.
But I don't know. To me, soon, if soon is referring to past when I'm already dead, it's, to me, no matter what you say, it can't be soon. Do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand.
Discrimination against the handicapped.
The handicapped thing, to me, that's still a good argument against your God, is that even though you say other parts of the Bible say to be good to the lepers and the handicapped or whatever, they are prohibited from the congregation of the Lord. So to me, that's discrimination. It doesn't belong.
Wasn't that medically necessary? Wasn't leprosy highly contagious in the ancient world?
Oh, yeah, but the particular one I'm talking about is the preventing handicapped people from entering the congregation of the Lord, and then it lists, it doesn't include leprosy, it lists one eye, lame, hunchback, things like that, which to me...
I would explain that in one of 2 ways. That's either a dramatic symbolism, similar to only the perfect lamb can be sacrificed on the altar. It's a discrimination against imperfect lambs for an aesthetic and symbolic and dramatic reason rather than an ethical reason. I don't think there's any suggestion that handicapped people were ever regarded as being morally inferior.
But if you were a handicapped person in that time period, how could you not avoid getting that message that you're not good enough, you can't come in here?
Well, I'm not sure whether they got that message or not. Maybe it's just that you can't come in here because it's not liturgically appropriate. Liturgical appropriateness was far more important to ancient people than to us.
Yeah,
the alternative explanation was that's just a concession to a primitive mindset, which was gradually going to be improved. There is certainly an evolution of morality in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the real God would ever have said that in the first place.
Oh, great left hand taken on the face of George Foreman. Ali scored 3 in a row that time. Foreman's right eye looking to be closed. Ali has tremendous look of confidence on that face. These punches are landing, bouncing off the eye of the heavyweight champion of the world, George Foreman.
The unequal value of men and women in the Bible.
Inequality of women, or lack of equality.
Another example.
Yeah.
That gradually evolves.
Oh, but why couldn't, like the story of Adam and Eve, it has Eve as a helper without specifying helper in what. So you have to assume helper in everything. So basically inferior.
Oh, no. Now, Jesus was the biggest helper of all, but he was not inferior. To be a helper is not to be inferior. To be a servant is not to be inferior. In the world's eyes it is. In Christian eyes it's not.
Well, it is to be inferior in some way. If you have a carpenter and a helper, the helper is officially inferior in terms of carpentry.
That's right.
In the same way, a human being...
He's subordinate. That is, he is ordained to another rather than to himself. But he is not of any intrinsically less worth. So even if it is declared that Eve is to serve Adam, that doesn't mean she's inferior. Still, suppose it just said wives obey your husbands. That would not indicate that wives were inferior. Jesus obeyed his father more perfectly than anybody else does, and yet he claimed equality with his father. See, the world almost always assumes that to obey is a power relationship.
Right.
The weak obeys the strong.
Right.
And that's true in the world. It's not true in the church.
I don't know. That seems like, like all these ideas have to be specially understood.
That's true. There's a radical, different air that blows around Christian ideas. That's why women who are clamoring for women's ordination on the basis of empowerment are simply breathing the wrong air. That's not what the church is about.
I disagree. I think power is exactly what the church is about. I think
exactly wrong there.
Yeah, because all these things about women obeying men, I think that doesn't come from some special divine wisdom. I think it comes from men asserting their power. Another specific thing is you said that Adam and Eve were held equally responsible by God. Well, 1 Timothy 2:12 says, I do not permit a woman to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. So to me, that there is blaming the woman.
Staggered! Foreman staggered! Definitely! Right on the button! Right on the jaw of George Foreman!
Well, I must admit that the difficulty I have with that verse is the juxtaposition of two ideas, each of which I find acceptable, but the juxtaposition of which I find problematic. Number one, a woman should not have authority over a man. Authority doesn't necessarily mean superiority. Number two, Eve was deceived first, then Adam. That's just what Genesis says. But then to deduce a woman should not have authority over a man from the fact that Eve was deceived first rather than Adam, I don't quite understand the reasoning there.
Right. Yeah, me neither. Another thing the Bible doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I must confess that passage doesn't make sense to me either. I haven't studied it very much.
Slavery and witches.
Yeah.
Okay, last question is about slavery. I think the Bible fails in the issue of slavery.
Sure it does.
Okay, then how could it be the Word of God if it's...
Because it's not supposed to solve every problem in the world. The claim that Christians make for it is simply that it's infallible, that it doesn't make any mistakes. They don't claim that it tells you all the truth, not even all the religious and moral truth. There's a terribly important truth about slavery that the Bible doesn't tell you, namely that it's intrinsically wrong.
And that's not reason enough to disbelieve it?
Well, there's reason enough to see it in a much more historical setting than fundamentalists do. It's certainly not a timeless blueprint from no particular time, equally for all times. It's an evolving document.
Yeah, but this is sort of like, to me, a monstrous overlooking or oversight to not only not speak out against it, but to say things in favor of it all. But you said something about slavery being more like indentured servitude, or be more like servitude than actual
No,
slavery?
I said that the Jews had servants but not slaves. They had indentured servants, but they didn't have slaves who had no rights whatsoever. They had seriously curtailed rights, but they were treated as human beings rather than as chattel.
Yet it refers to them as possessions and property.
Where?
Leviticus 25, 44 to 46.
What does that say?
And as for your male and female slaves whom you may have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of the strangers who sojourn among you, and they shall become your property, and you may take them as an inheritance for your children after you to inherit them as a possession.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's...
Well, I would say that's similar to Moses allowing divorce. That's by way of concession to human weakness. Kind of a grudging acknowledgement. That's the best you can do for now. But even so, they were given significantly more rights than in any other ancient country.
They were allowed to be beaten.
Yeah.
And but I would say the strongest argument in the issue of slavery for me is Exodus 21, 29 to 32. And it talks about the penalty for somebody whose ox has been known to thrust with its horn, killing somebody, the penalty is death. But the penalty for killing a slave is a fine. So there's a clear distinction between the value of a slave and the value of a free person.
Yeah.
And that's to me like a disproof of... I don't know, I mean, do we need the Bible? Can't we figure out things on our own better?
Well, in a lot of ways, we today can figure out things a lot better than some ancient passages in the Bible figured out things.
I would expect...
Again, the Bible doesn't claim to be the final, ultimate truth about everything for all time.
Doesn't it, pretty much?
Fundamentalists claim that for it. But the Bible never says that about itself. It's a story. It's a historical record of God and humanity interacting, and it's full of a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah. But it's God. It's bad stuff claimed to come from God. Because that's the Mosaic Law. The Mosaic Law was given to Moses directly from God. So
yeah, in stages.
Yeah.
Not all at once.
Well,
I guess that's all they could take at the time.
Yeah. I think something like "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." I can't see that as a stage in moral development. That's just plain wrong.
Oh, that's much easier to defend.
Yeah.
You probably think that's ridiculous because of something like the Salem witch trials.
Yep.
Which I would agree is a horror, simply because those people were not witches.
Yeah.
But if there really is a witch, if it is possible to be possessed by the devil and to be in league with evil spirits, that's an extremely dangerous person. That's worse than a traitor.
How can there be divine wisdom in a book that encourages people to kill other people who don't agree with them in their idea of reality or metaphysics or religion? Because the Wiccan...
Well, there's no verse in the Bible that says that. You can kill anybody if they happen to disagree with you. The verse says, in effect, I, the Lord your God, declare to you that there are witches, and if you find any, you better kill them. So it's not, here is your ideology, and here is the Wiccan's ideology, and you have a right to kill in defense of your ideology.
I don't consider it a crime to be a witch.
Because you don't think that you can sell yourself to the devil.
You can, but witches, they're not that type. Witches, to me, are superstitious people who believe in spells and incantations.
That's modern witches. Ancient witches knew what they were doing and deliberately sold themselves to the devil.
I don't know about that.
like modern Satanists. There are a few modern Satanists who are serious, not just rock stars trying to shock people, and who do ritual murder, sometimes going up to human babies. Ask the police department of a number of major cities who have had an infestation of satanic groups.
What I read about that is that there wasn't much to it, really.
Sometimes there isn't. I know. There's a lot of groups that just tell spectacular stories, like, what's his name, Bob Larson. But there are also some cases. There was one up here in Massachusetts some years ago, in Revere, I think.
Yeah, I saw some graffiti where they spelled Satan wrong, S-A-T-I-N. Then you know they're false.
Editorial comment: Satan is spelled S-A-T-A-N.
Okay. All right. Well, this gives me more things to think about and helps identify what the issues are and how you think about them, how I think about them.
Concluding comments. I do not believe in a God that would say, well, I won't tell man that slavery is wrong just yet. I'll wait until later on because they're not quite ready yet. I think the real God has given us some eternal values, like equal rights for all humans, and he would never accommodate those values to Peter's concept of the evolving morality of the Bible. I find it quite ironic that Peter thinks Christianity supports an absolute divine morality, as opposed to modern moral relativism, yet he readily resorts to invoking an evolving morality as an explanation for clear biblical immoralities. I suspect Peter would respond, the evolving morality of the Bible presupposes the eternal morality that it points to. Oh, I don't think so. I don't think it presupposes it. It just contradicts it. Barbarian morality is not a harbinger of true morality. It's just barbarian morality. This evolving morality excuse, this cultural context excuse, is what most Christians fall back on as their last line of defense if you manage to knock away all their other rationalizations. I hope listeners caught several significant shifts in Peter's lines of argument. In our second meeting, the recovery of his daughter was a definite miracle.
I've seen miracles myself, literal physical miracles in front of my eyes.
But in our third session, it was a possible miracle.
May have been miraculous. Looked like it.
Okay.
I'm not terribly confident that it was.
In our first meeting, he explained a creation day as an age. But by our third meeting, he abandoned that claim and simply called the creation story a poetic description. In our first meeting, he asserted I was misunderstanding the indentured servitude of the Bible as slavery.
Which seems to be slavery, like capitalism seems to Marx to be slavery, but it isn't. There's a significant difference.
But by our third session, he falls back on the claim that if it was slavery, it was a primitive stage in the evolution of morality.
Well, I would say that's similar to Moses allowing divorce. That's by way of concession to human weakness. Kind of a grudging acknowledgement. That's the best you can do for now.
Peter said the Greek word doulos can mean servant as well as slave. Yes, but the first meaning given is slave, only the second one given is servant. And Jesus, when he is speaking specifically of hired servants, in Luke 15:17 and 15:19, as opposed to slaves, does not use the word doulos, but mistheos, which means a hired servant. So when Jesus does use doulos in Luke 12:47, he is speaking of slaves, not servants. And note that one does not whip servants, one whips slaves. Peter said we can use parables involving wicked stepmothers, but that doesn't mean we approve of wicked stepmothers. Yeah, but if they are portrayed as blameless and within their rights, as the slave owner is in Luke 12:47, then that strongly suggests we do approve of them. If Jesus were a man of divine wisdom, I think he would have spoken out on the injustice of slavery, or at the very least scrupulously avoided a slave owner and the whipping of slaves in any parable designed to illustrate divine justice. Regarding witches, I think Peter falsely redefines witches as persons completely committed to evil. If that's what the Bible meant by witch, then maybe I would agree. Yeah, we should kill a Mr. Hitler, for example. But that is not what the Bible means by the word witch. The Catholic Bible uses the word sorceress in Exodus 22:17, where it says, "You shall not let a sorceress live." And it cross-references this verse with Leviticus 19:27 and Deuteronomy 18:10, where those verses speak of divination, soothsaying, fortune-telling, and casting of spells. In other words, it refers to the activities of a witch in the common modern understanding of that term. Biblically, a witch or sorceress is not defined as a person committed to the devil, as Peter falsely claimed. This is a very common Christian tactic to illegitimately redefine terms in order to make a passage more palatable. The simple fact is that the Bible is brutally intolerant of, essentially, the Wiccan religion and its followers. Peter said,
There's no verse in the Bible that says that. You can kill anybody if they happen to disagree with you. So it's not, here is your ideology and here is the Wiccan's ideology, and you have a right to kill in defense of your ideology.
oh, yes, there is. Deuteronomy 13:6-10, quote, "If your own full brother, or your son or daughter, or your beloved wife or your intimate friend, entices you secretly to serve other gods, do not yield to him, or listen to him, nor look with pity upon him to spare or shield him, but kill him. Your hand shall be the first raised to slay him. The rest of the people shall join in with you. You shall stone him to death." That passage is talking about people who simply believe in other religions, not people who are abnormally committed to evil. And any religion that tells you to kill people because they decide to follow a different religion is a false religion.
Another sneaky right hand. This time he works over the shoulder of Foreman. It's a combination. Three, four, five, six. Foreman gets up to the knee. 8. That's it. The fight is stopped. Muhammad Ali, a dramatic 8th-round knockout. He knocks out.
I have to say that Peter is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and it's easy to be dazzled by his intellect. But if you carefully follow through on each issue, as I did, I think you'll see that all of these specialized understandings and fine distinctions in the meanings of words that Peter makes do not indicate the unique truth of Christianity, but rather its moral and intellectual bankruptcy. I see Peter as a professional whitewasher for the church. He's brilliant, but he is doing, in my view, not something noble, but something pernicious, supporting a harmful, archaic religion. There exists the fond notion among Catholics that some of the things that don't make sense to them are actually explainable by those Catholics more in the know, or by the more educated priests, or by Catholic theologians like Peter, if one were to pursue the issues that far. But I think that that notion is an intentional self-deception. It allows those Catholics, who never actually do pursue the issues that far, to continue believing in a false ideology. They nurture the fond presumption that, well, somebody somewhere understands it, even if I don't. When in fact, the whole thing, as a belief system, is simply false. When I was a young man in my early 20s, I was very interested in a young woman who was a devout Catholic, and I was nearly driven to despair by my inability to reconcile her beliefs with my own assessment of religious truth. It was no small matter. How could I ever hope for us to be in love if our souls were apart on such an ultimate concern? One day, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk to her father, a very intelligent man, also a devout Catholic, very involved with the local church. I was almost ecstatic in anticipation. Now, finally, here's my chance to get what I had been missing. A chance to learn the secret slant that makes sense of Catholicism. That radically different, esoteric Catholic air that Peter refers to. that special knowledge or way of thinking that will finally enlighten me to the truth of Catholicism. Well, I was shocked. Not far into our discussion, it became abundantly clear to me that this man did not know anything that I did not already know. He didn't have any special knowledge. There was no secret slant. There was no hidden mystery to be revealed. The answer was very simple and very clear. Catholicism is wrong. It does not make sense. So here I am today, having pursued that notion that somebody somewhere may have the answer as to how Catholicism is true, and having finally taken it to the very top, and I found that, yeah, my provisional suspicion was right all along. There is no way to make sense of it. If a man of Peter Kreeft's intellect can't make legitimate sense of it, nobody can. The honest course of action is to come to one's own understanding of reality, whether theistic or atheistic, and to scrap the superstitious, irrational, Catholic version of reality. Thank you for listening.